After my husband's death, I thought the worst pain of my life had already passed. But I was wrong, because the real cruelty came from the very people I had brought into this world. My son, the child I carried for 9 months, the baby I held in my arms through sleepless nights, the boy I nursed through fever and watched grow into a man, was the one who raised his hand against me. The moment it happened, I could not believe it was real. His palm crashing against my face, the sting burning not only my cheek, but my heart, because no mother ever thinks her son will betray her like that. His wife stood by his side, silent, her eyes cold as if she had been waiting for this day. And together, they told me I was no longer welcome in the house I had helped build, the house that carried my husband's memory, the house that held the laughter of my children's childhood. My knees shook as I tried to steady myself, my body trembling as he shouted at me to leave. And when I didn't move fast enough, he shoved me toward the door like I was some stranger. My heart was shattering with every step, but I kept walking because I had no strength left to fight him. Outside, the night was dark, and the air was heavy, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I thought of my husband then, how he would have never let this happen, how he had always promised me protection and love, but he was gone, and I was left to face the cruelty of our own blood. I don't know what gave me the courage to do what I did next, but as I stood in the street with nothing but tears and pain, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I never thought I would call again. It was my boyfriend, a man from my past, someone I had hidden away like a secret because my family would never have accepted him. But in that moment, he was the only one who came to mind, the only one I thought might still care for me when no one else did. When he answered, his voice was cautious, surprised to hear from me after so long. But when he heard the way I was crying, he didn't ask questions. He just said he was coming. I sat on the edge of the pavement, waiting, my hands shaking, my heart pounding, wondering what would happen when he arrived, whether I was making a mistake. But before I could think too much, he pulled up, and the relief I felt seeing him step out of that car almost broke me all over again. He helped me up without a word, his hands gentle, his eyes searching my face. And when I told him what had happened, how my own son had struck me and thrown me out, I saw the anger flare in his expression. We didn't go far, only to the corner of the street, because before I knew it, my son came storming out of the house, shouting, demanding to know why I was still there and who this man was. The two of them locked eyes, and in that instant I knew there was going to be a fight. My son, tall and broad, full of the arrogance of youth and the fury of greed, stepped toward him with clenched fists, while my boyfriend, older but not weak, stood his ground with the strength of someone who had faced life's hardships and refused to bow. The first shove came from my son, his anger spilling over, and then the fists started flying. I screamed, my voice cracking as I begged them to stop. But they didn't listen. Each punch was louder than the last, each grunt and cry tearing through the night, and neighbors began to gather, whispering, watching, judging. I wanted to run between them, but I was frozen, torn between the son I had raised and the man who had come to protect me. It didn't take long before someone called the police. The flashing lights cut through the darkness, the sirens breaking apart the chaos. Officers rushed in, pulling them apart, shouting orders, demanding explanations. I was shaking, trying to explain, my words tumbling out as tears streamed down my face. They listened. They looked at my bruised cheek. They saw the madness of the night, and finally they calmed everyone down. My son, still furious, tried to twist the story, tried to make it seem like I was the problem, like I had brought shame into his home by calling another man. But the officers didn't buy it. They warned him. They told him violence against his own mother was not something they would tolerate. But still I saw no remorse in his eyes, only resentment. His wife standing behind him whispered in his ear, her expression one of irritation, as if I were nothing but an obstacle standing in the way of their peace. When it was over, the police left, satisfied that the situation had been handled. But the truth was nothing had been solved. I was still homeless, unwanted in the house where I had spent decades, still unwanted by the son I had sacrificed everything for. My boyfriend wanted me to come with him, to leave everything behind, but my heart was heavy. I couldn't decide in that moment if I was ready to walk away completely or if I still held on to some fragile hope that my son would wake up from his cruelty and remember the love I had given him all his life. The night after the police left, I sat alone in silence, my mind replaying every moment over and over like a cruel movie I couldn't stop. The sting of my son's slap still burned on my skin, but deeper than that was the ache in my chest, the realization that the boy I had once held to my heart had turned into a man I could no longer recognize. I didn't sleep at all. I just stared at the ceiling of the small guest room my boyfriend had offered me, listening to the sound of cars passing on the road, wondering how life had brought me here. I had always imagined growing old surrounded by family, with children and grandchildren visiting, with warmth in my home and love in the air. But instead I was now a mother rejected, cast aside like a burden. Every choice I had made for him, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every coin I had saved so he could study, every piece of jewelry I had sold so he could build a future. It all seemed to vanish in that single strike across my face. When morning came, I decided to go back to the house, not to fight, not to argue, but to try one last time. A mother's heart doesn't give up easily. My boyfriend tried to stop me, told me it was too soon, told me I would only get hurt again, but I told him I had to. So I walked back, each step heavy with fear and hope. When I reached the door, it was locked from the inside, and when I knocked, my son's wife opened it only halfway, her eyes sharp with disdain. She told me coldly that I was no longer welcome, that the house was theirs now, and that I should stop embarrassing myself. I tried to push past her words, tried to ask for just a few minutes with my son, but she slammed the door before I could even finish. I stood there, staring at the wood, my tears soaking into the silence, until finally I turned away. That was the moment I knew something inside them had changed, forever. I walked back slowly, the streets blurring through my tears, until I found myself at the park near our old neighborhood. I sat on a bench, my body trembling, watching children play, their laughter piercing me like 1,000 knives. I remembered when my son had been that small, running with scraped knees and messy hair, turning back to call Mama every few minutes, just to make sure I was still there. How could that child become the man who now saw me as a burden? My chest felt hollow, my hands numb, and I realized then that I couldn't keep forcing myself where I wasn't wanted. For the first time in my life, I had to think about myself. When I returned, my boyfriend was waiting, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. He simply pulled out a chair and told me to sit. I sat, my body collapsing into the seat, and he poured me tea like it was the most normal thing in the world. For a moment I hated myself for needing him, for leaning on him after years of hiding our connection. But then I remembered the loneliness I felt, and how he was the only one who showed up when I had no one. That night I told him more than I ever had before. I told him about my marriage, about the love I had for my husband, about the way life had changed after his death, and about how my son's greed had poisoned everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he simply said, "You don't deserve this. You deserve peace. Peace." The word lingered in my mind long after he said it. Could I really find peace? Or was I doomed to live out the rest of my years in sorrow, haunted by betrayal? I wasn't sure. Days passed, and I tried to stay quiet, tried to rebuild a rhythm, but my son didn't stop. He began spreading rumors about me, telling neighbors I had abandoned the family, that I was choosing another man over my own blood. It was cruel and twisted, but what hurt the most was how quickly people believed him. Whispers followed me everywhere, people staring, their eyes full of judgment. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, to show them the bruises on my soul. But instead I kept walking. I realized then how lonely it was to be on the wrong side of your own child's lies. One evening, as the sun was setting, I walked past the house again. The curtains were open, and I saw them, my son, his wife, and their friends, laughing, eating, enjoying the life I had once built for them. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. I turned away quickly, but my foot slipped on the pavement and I nearly fell. A stranger passing by caught my arm and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but inside I was breaking apart. I didn't even recognize my own life anymore. That night, my boyfriend suggested we talk to a lawyer. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to drag my family into court. Didn't want to turn a private wound into a public battle. But then I remembered the property, the legacy of my husband, the inheritance I had worked so hard to protect, and I realized that if I didn't fight, they would strip it all away from me. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about refusing to be erased from my own story. The next day, we sat in a lawyer's office, the air thick with tension, as I explained everything. The lawyer listened, his face stern, and then he leaned forward and said, "If what you're saying is true, you still have rights. No one can throw you out of your own home, and no son, no matter how entitled, can erase you from your husband's estate." For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope flicker inside me. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought. But even hope can be dangerous. When word reached my son that I was seeking legal help, his fury exploded. He came to the house where I was staying, pounding on the door, shouting, demanding that I stop. My boyfriend stepped outside to confront him, and once again fists flew. This time, though, I didn't scream or beg them to stop. I stood in the doorway watching, my face cold, my heart steel. I realized then that I couldn't be afraid anymore. My son had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I looked at him that night, and I realized the boy I once carried in my arms was gone forever. He had been replaced by a stranger whose eyes burned with greed, whose voice carried no love, only venom. I wondered if it was my fault, if somewhere along the way I had loved him too much, spoiled him with too many sacrifices, given him everything so easily that he forgot the value of a mother's heart. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the shadows on the wall, my mind restless, my chest heavy with the kind of grief no words could ever capture. When morning came, I did not go back to the house. I knew they would not open the door. I knew they would not welcome me. Instead, I sat at the edge of the bed and whispered to myself that I had to be stronger than the pain they wanted me to drown in. The police had already seen us fight once. They knew there was tension, but in my silence I realized silence was exactly what my son and his wife wanted from me. They wanted me erased, forgotten, like a stain they could wash away. So I decided I would not stay quiet anymore. I gathered every document I still had. My marriage papers, the property records, The old receipts and notes my husband had kept so carefully, each one proof of the life we built together. I took them all to the lawyer. He looked at me and nodded, telling me these were strong enough to prove my right, strong enough to keep me in the picture my son was trying so hard to cut me out of. Still, I wasn't ready for what came next. My son filed a case against me before I could even take mine forward. He accused me of abandoning him, of living an immoral life with another man, of trying to take what was never mine. Reading those papers broke me in ways that slap never could. To see your child take your name and drag it through the mud in front of strangers, to watch him twist love into shame, that is the kind of pain that tears pieces of you apart. I wanted to tear the paper, throw it away, but the lawyer stopped me. He told me we would fight it. He told me truth still had a place in court, even if it had none in my son's heart. The hearings began, and each time I sat there in that cold room, I saw him on the other side, avoiding my eyes, his wife whispering poison in his ear. I wanted to stand up and scream, "Look at me, I am your mother." But instead I stayed seated, my hands trembling in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. I learned then that sometimes the greatest strength is sitting still, letting the truth rise without letting rage drag you down. Witnesses came, documents were read, voices were raised, but through it all I sat quietly, my face calm though. Inside my heart was a battlefield. Weeks turned into months, and the case dragged on. But the truth slowly started to unravel the lies. The judge began to see what I had always known, that my husband's estate was not theirs alone, that the house was not theirs alone, that I was not some shadow they could erase. Slowly the tide turned, and I watched my son's confidence crack, watched his wife's smugness falter. For the first time they looked afraid, and that fear, it gave me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. But this was not just about property. It was about dignity. It was about standing in a world that had tried to push me down and saying, "I will not disappear." Even after the judge ruled in my favor, even after I was given the right to my home again, I didn't rush back. I didn't knock on that door and demand a room. Instead, I stood outside the gate one evening, watching the lights flicker inside, hearing the muffled sound of their lives continuing, and I realized that going back inside those walls would not heal me. It would only chain me again. So I turned away. I chose instead to build something new. My boyfriend, who had been by my side through every tear, every storm, every humiliation, asked me to move in with him. At first I hesitated, unsure if it was right, unsure if I was betraying the memory of my husband. But then I thought about betrayal, and how it had already lived in my house for years, in the greed of my son, in the coldness of his wife. So I said yes. We started small, with nothing more than a rented apartment and a few bags of clothes. But there was peace there, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. No shouting, no judgment, no doors slammed in my face. Just quiet mornings and evenings where I could breathe. But the past has a way of following you. Even in my new home, whispers reached me. Relatives came knocking, scolding me for abandoning my son, telling me I was selfish, that I was choosing love over duty. I listened quietly, my eyes steady, and when they were done, I told them this. A mother's duty is not to die for her child's greed. A mother's duty is to live with dignity. And then I shut the door. For the first time, I chose myself. Yet even with that strength, there were nights when the loneliness crept in. Nights when I stared at old photos, my son smiling in my arms, his little hands clutching my sari, and I wept until my chest ached. A mother never stops loving no matter how deep the wound. But love does not mean surrender. I could love him from afar, even if he no longer loved me back. One evening, as I sat by the window, I saw children walking home from school, their laughter echoing through the streets, and for the first time I didn't feel pain. I felt hope. Hope that maybe one day my story would be more than betrayal and tears. Maybe one day it would be a lesson. I wanted to tell it, to share it, to let the world know that even when your own blood turns against you, even when your heart is shattered, you can still stand, you can still rise, you can still breathe. And maybe, just maybe, someone listening would find strength in my voice. So here I am, telling you this. Every word a piece of me, every memory a scar, but also a reminder that miracles don't always look like sudden rescues or flashes of light. Sometimes miracles are simply survival. Sometimes miracles are the strength to walk away, to rebuild, to refuse to be erased. My son tried to take everything from me. He failed. He tried to silence me. He failed. And as long as I am here, as long as I have breath, I will keep speaking, because my story is not over. I remember waking up one morning with a heaviness in my chest that felt like a stone pressing me into the mattress. It wasn't the weight of age or illness. It was the weight of knowing my own child had cast me out like I was nothing more than dust under his shoes. The memory of that slap still burned on my cheek even though days had passed. I touched my skin and could almost feel the sting again, not from his hand, but from the truth that lay behind it. A son who could strike his mother had already lost his soul. I whispered to myself in that quiet, "You are still alive. You still have breath. You still have worth." I forced myself to rise, forced myself to look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back. She was older, yes, with lines carved by grief and years, but her eyes still held fire. That fire would not be extinguished. The case in court was behind me now, but the battles inside my heart continued. My boyfriend often told me to let go, to forget the child who had hurt me. But how could I? Blood has a way of tying itself around your soul, no matter how poisoned it becomes. At night I prayed for him, prayed that the greed would leave him, prayed that the boy I once knew might return. But when the sun rose each day and no call came, no letter arrived, my prayers felt like whispers into an empty sky. I carried on anyway, because that is what mothers do. We carry on. Living with my boyfriend was not perfect, but it was safe. He became my anchor when the storm threatened to swallow me. There were days I broke down, crying until I had no strength left, and he simply held me, saying nothing, because he knew there were no words that could stitch those wounds. Other times he made me laugh, reminded me that even in brokenness, joy could still find its way through the cracks. We built a life together slowly, piece by piece, not out of wealth but out of shared pain and shared hope. Still, society is not kind to women like me. Neighbors gossiped. Some said I was shameless, that I should have accepted my son's cruelty silently, that living with a man without marriage was a sin. I listened from my window, their voices sharp as knives, but I no longer let them cut me. If they knew the truth, they would still twist it, because that is what people do when they are too afraid to look at their own darkness. I chose to ignore them, to protect my peace. But peace is fragile. One evening, as I walked back from the market, a group of men blocked my path. They were friends of my son, their smirks cruel, their words soaked in venom. They mocked me, calling me names, telling me I had ruined my own life. I tried to pass quietly, but one of them grabbed my arm. For a moment, fear gripped me, the old fear of being powerless, of being a victim. But then something inside me snapped. I yanked my arm free, stared into his eyes, and said in a voice steady as steel, I have survived worse than you. Do not test me." They laughed, but they stepped aside. I walked past them with my head held high, my hands trembling only once I was safely home. That night, I told myself I would never again let anyone make me feel small. As time passed, the distance between me and my son grew larger. Like a canyon, no bridge could cross. Then, one day, I heard news that shook me. His wife had left him, the same woman who had poisoned him against me. The same woman who had laughed as I was thrown out, had packed her bags and walked away. People said it was because of money, that she found someone richer. I should have felt satisfaction, should have thought, now he knows how betrayal feels. But instead my heart ached, because even though he had hurt me, he was still my son, and I knew the loneliness that betrayal leaves behind. I cried that night. Not for myself, but for him. I thought maybe this would be the moment he would come back, knock on my door, ask for forgiveness. But he didn't. Pride kept him away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and he remained silent. I had to accept that silence was his choice. Meanwhile, my boyfriend encouraged me to focus on myself. He took me to places I had never been before. Gardens blooming with flowers, temples filled with prayers, even to the sea where the waves roared louder than my memories. Standing there with the water rushing at my feet, I felt small, but also free, like the ocean was washing away pieces of my pain. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself for still giving me moments of beauty amidst the ruins. But life has a way of testing you again just when you think you've found your footing. One night there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I froze. It was my son. His eyes were hollow, his clothes disheveled, his face pale. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, in a broken voice, he said, "Ma, I have nowhere else to go." My knees almost gave out. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to remind him of the night he had slammed it on me. But another part, the mother part, could not. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the table silent, while my boyfriend watched cautiously. Finally, my son spoke. He told me everything, how his wife had left, how his friends had abandoned him, how the money he had fought so hard for was slipping away. He admitted he had made mistakes, that he had let greed blind him, that he had hurt me in ways he could never undo. Tears rolled down his face, and for the first time in years I saw my boy again, not the stranger he had become. I reached across the table, placed my hand on his, and said, "You cannot erase the past, but you can choose what you become now." It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, does not return overnight. He stayed with us for weeks, trying to piece his life back together. There were arguments, moments of tension, but also moments where we laughed, moments where I glimpsed the child I had once rocked to sleep. Slowly, a fragile thread of forgiveness began to weave between us. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I knew the scars would always remain, both on my heart and on his. I knew there would always be a distance, a shadow. Yet I also knew that life had given me something rare. A second chance. Not perfect, not clean, but a chance, nonetheless. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, I realize something I didn't before. Survival is not just about living through the blows, through the betrayals, through the slaps and the slammed doors. Survival is about what you choose after. Do you let bitterness define you? Or do you let resilience carry you forward? I chose resilience. I chose to keep breathing, to keep standing, to keep telling my story. And to you listening, I will say this: love fiercely, but never let even love erase your worth. Fight for your place in this world, because no one else will. And when life knocks you down, rise. Even if your knees shake, even if your heart breaks, rise. Because your story is not over until you decide it is. When my son returned, even for that short while, it stirred parts of my soul that I thought had gone quiet forever. Each morning I would wake before him, make tea, and stand by the window watching the street outside while he still slept. I would hear him stir in the other room, and a strange warmth filled me. Not the warmth of forgetting all the pain he had caused, but the warmth of knowing he was alive, under my roof, not lost completely to me. There were times I wanted to reach out, to hold him like I used to, but I stopped myself. We were fragile, like glass barely glued together. Too much pressure, and it would all shatter again. But it didn't last. Slowly his old ways crept back in. He wanted money, more than I could give, more than my boyfriend and I could afford. He wanted comfort, the same comfort he had once chased by throwing me aside. And when I said no, when I told him that my life was no longer his to control, his eyes hardened again. One night he shouted, cursed, slammed the door and left. I stood there, watching him walk away into the night. And I knew this time I couldn't follow. This time I had to let him go. I thought the story would end there, with another heartbreak, another silence stretching between us. But life had other plans. Weeks later I got a call from the police. My son had been arrested for fraud. My heart sank, not because of the shame, not because of the scandal, but because I had always feared this road for him. I went to the station, my steps heavy, my chest tight, and when I saw him behind those bars, his head lowered, his face hollow, my body trembled. He looked up and saw me. And in that instant, the years of anger, betrayal, pain, they all melted into something simpler. The bond between a mother and her child. He broke down, sobbing like a boy, his hands clutching the bars as if they were the only thing keeping him upright. "Ma, I've ruined everything," he whispered, and I, with tears streaming down my cheeks, said the only thing I could. "You are still alive. As long as you are alive, nothing is ruined beyond repair." I fought for him, just as I had always fought. I spoke to the lawyer. I begged the judge. I promised to take responsibility for him. People told me I was a fool, that I should let him rot, that he deserved it. Maybe they were right. But my heart did not know how to let go completely. A mother's heart never learns that. He was released on bail, but his life was in pieces. He had debts, enemies, scars that money could not heal. I brought him home again, not to the house he had thrown me out of, but to my small place with my boyfriend. At first it was tense, awkward, but then something shifted. My son began to work, small jobs, honest ones. He began to eat with us, laugh sometimes, even help with chores. It was not perfect. Nothing ever would be. But it was something. It was healing, slow and fragile, but real. There were still moments when anger flickered in me, nights when I lay awake, remembering the sting of his hand, the sound of his voice calling me names, the humiliation of being cast out. Forgiveness is not a river that flows endlessly. It is a well you must keep drawing from, and sometimes it runs dry. On those nights I would sit by the window, my hands shaking, and whisper to myself, "You survived. That is enough." And it was. Survival was enough, because survival gave me the chance to see another sunrise, another day, another step forward. It gave me the chance to tell this story, to let you hear the truth of what a woman can endure and still stand tall. My son may never be the boy I once knew. He may never give me the love I dreamed of. But I learned to stop chasing what was gone. I learned to stand in the life I had, to be grateful for the fragments of peace, the moments of laughter, the quiet evenings with a man who never turned his back on me. That was my miracle. Not wealth, not victory in court, not even reconciliation, but the simple fact that I am still here, still breathing, still speaking. So if you take anything from my words tonight, let it be this. Do not measure your life by what others take from you. Measure it by what you refuse to surrender. Dignity, hope, the strength to rise even when everything in you wants to stay down. Those are the treasures no one can steal, not even your own blood. I was cast out of my home, struck by the very hands I once held as a baby. I was betrayed, abandoned, mocked, but I did not vanish. I found love again. I found a way to survive. I found a way to stand and to keep walking. And now, as I tell you this, I want you to know, your story is not over either. No matter how dark the night, there is always a dawn waiting. And maybe that is the true miracle of my life. Not the money, not the house, not even the broken family. The miracle is that I am still here, wrinkles and all, voice trembling but unbroken, telling you my truth. Because as long as I can speak, as long as I can share, I am alive. And that, my dear, is everything.